They said my son would never speak. But the moment he saw her, said the word I'd waited 6 years to hear. It happened on a rainy Tuesday, the kind that soaked your socks before you even reached the car. Parents were rushing through the parking lot of Westwood Academy, coffee in one hand, phone in the other. But Jonathan Keller, the CEO of a major biotech firm, stood frozen under the arched stone entrance, watching through the tall cafeteria windows. His son, Caleb, had stopped mid-step, and then he said it. Hi. One syllable. Soft, fragile, but undeniable. He said it to Miss Loretta. The school cafeteria wasn't known for warmth. Stainless steel, industrial lighting, and a low murmur of entitled complaints from silver-spooned sixth-graders. But somehow, Miss Loretta made the space feel like a grandmother's kitchen. She wore pink Crocs with chicken-patterned socks and a silver heart necklace that sometimes got flour on it when she needed dough. Nobody knew her full story, just that she commuted 2 hours each way, never missed a day, and knew every kid's allergy by memory. Most students barely acknowledged her presence. To them, she was the lunch lady. To faculty, she was support staff. To Caleb, apparently, she was a miracle. Jonathan burst into the cafeteria like he'd forgotten how to breathe. His Italian loafers squeaked against the linoleum. Heads turned. A few teachers paused mid-bite. "Did my son just speak?" he asked, voice breaking, eyes scanning the room for confirmation. Miss Loretta stood still, one hand over her heart, the other still holding a red plastic tray. "He did," she said gently. "He looked right at me and said hi." Plain as day. Caleb was standing beside her, staring at the chicken tenders. His little hands were twitching at his sides the way they always did when he was overstimulated. But he wasn't panicking. He wasn't curling into himself or stimming violently. He looked calm. Jonathan's knees almost buckled. He dropped to the floor beside his son and cupped the boy's face with both hands. "You said hi, buddy," he whispered. Caleb didn't speak again, but he gave the faintest nod. The moment should have ended in peace, joy, gratitude, but didn't, because Summonino one knows who cleared their throat and said under their breath, "Can't believe it took a lunch lady to do what a whole team of doctors couldn't." That set off a ripple effect. By the end of the day, whispers had turned to rumors. Parents were gossiping in group chats. Teachers exchanged loaded glances in the lounge. And Principal Reinhardt, already irritated by the board's pressure to increase diversity optics, called Miss Loretta into his office with an HR rep and a clipboard. "You didn't prompt the child to speak, correct?" the HR woman asked. "No, Em," Loretta replied, hands folded politely. "I just said good morning like I always do." "And you didn't touch him?" "I wouldn't dare. Caleb's got boundaries. I respect them." The questions kept coming. Subtle, slippery, like they were trying to catch her in something. Outside the office, Jonathan was pacing like a man preparing to walk into court. He'd spent hundreds of thousands on speech therapists. He'd flown Caleb to Switzerland for a neuroplasticity retreat. Nothing had worked. And now, this woman, this black woman from East Baltimore with no degrees, no accolades, and no LinkedIn profile had cracked the code with nothing but a warm greeting and chicken fingers. He didn't know how to explain it, but he knew what he felt. Awe and guilt. Because the first time he saw Loretta, 2 years ago during a donor's lunch, he'd made a mental note. She doesn't belong here. Not in this ivy-covered institution built for board members' sons and senators' daughters. He never said it out loud, but he thought it. And now he was watching his son smile for the first time in months. Because of her. That night, he called an emergency PDA meeting. When they refused to convene on such short notice, he emailed every parent directly. His subject line was simple. "Let me tell you what my son said." He told them about Caleb, about the diagnosis, about the silence, and then about that single word, He ended with this: Miss Loretta is not a footnote. She's the headline. And if any of you see her as just a lunch lady, you don't deserve to call yourselves part of this community. It went viral by morning. Local news showed up. Then national. CNN aired a special on unexpected angels in education. Miss Loretta was invited to The View. She turned them down. "I've got kids to feed," she said. But the pressure was building, because not everyone celebrated her. A group of parents began circulating emails under the subject line, "Preserve our standards." They said the media was distorting things, that Jonathan's grief had clouded his judgment, that maybe Miss Loretta had trained Caleb somehow. Savants respond to food bribes, one message read. A week later, someone spray-painted "Stay in the kitchen" across her car. Jonathan saw it first. He was walking Caleb to class when he noticed the red paint on the old Corolla. He didn't flinch. He didn't call security. He drove straight to the front entrance, parked the vandalized car on the lawn, and wheeled out a whiteboard sign that read, "If this is how you treat kindness, I want no part of your excellence." And then he withdrew Caleb from school. But the story wasn't over, because the next day, Miss Loretta didn't come to work. For the first time in 12 years. No explanation, no call, just absence. Some said she quit. Others whispered she was politely asked to step away. That afternoon, the cafeteria served cold sandwiches and bottled water. Nobody complained. A week passed, then two, and then, out of nowhere, a press release. Jonathan Keller was donating $2 million to establish the Loretta Foundation, a nonprofit aimed at training school support staff nationwide on trauma-informed care, communication with neurodiverse students, and the invisible power of consistent, compassionate presence. He gave the opening speech at the first conference in downtown D.C. "My son said his first word to a woman this school never put in a brochure," he began. "That's on all of us." He paused, then added, voice cracking, "And if my board fires me for this, I'll thank them, because they'll finally have taught me something I didn't learn in the corner office, how to listen." The crowd rose in a standing ovation. But he wasn't looking at them. He was looking at the last row, where Miss Loretta sat, hands folded, heart necklace glinting in the light, smiling through tears. And beside her, holding a juice box and a drawing of a chicken, Caleb. Scribbled in red crayon at the bottom of the page were two shaky but unmistakable words. "Hi, Miss." Caleb didn't understand what a foundation was. He didn't know that his crayon drawing had ended up in a press packet, or that people across the country were reposting it with hashtags like Lunch Lady Hero and Caleb Speaks. He just knew Miss Loretta had gone away, and that made his stomach hurt. Jonathan had tried explaining. "She needed rest, buddy," he'd said, tucking Caleb into bed. "Sometimes, even angels need sleep." But Caleb had started stimming more. The hand flapping returned. He'd stopped eating the school's food entirely. When offered nuggets, he stared blankly, then turned his face away. At his new private therapy school, one designed for kids like him, didn't say another word for 3 weeks. Meanwhile, Westwood Academy scrambled to recover. They released a carefully worded statement thanking Miss Loretta for her years of service and wishing her well in her next chapter. Behind closed doors, however, the board was furious. "Do you realize how many alumni donors are pulling out?" barked Chairman Winslow in a heated meeting. "All because of a cafeteria worker and a biotech crybaby." Principal Reinhardt tried to calm things down. "Maybe we could offer her a consulting role. Quietly. Something behind the scenes." "She's not coming back," Winslow snapped. "She got her 15 minutes. Let's move on." But they couldn't, because every time they tried to hire a new lunch manager, the parents objected. "She's not Loretta," they'd say. One woman flatly told the interim chef, "If you don't know Caleb's story, you're not worthy of the apron." Eventually, the school settled for catering. But the food was bland, the kids complained, and staff morale plummeted. Then a letter arrived. It was handwritten in blue ink, addressed to Principal Reinhardt. The envelope was sealed with a faded sticker of a cartoon chicken. Inside, "Dear Sir, I appreciate the years you allowed me to serve. I did not need recognition. I needed dignity. Thank you for teaching me where that line was. Respectfully, Loretta M. James." The note made Reinhardt's ears burn. He crumpled it in frustration, then smoothed it out again. He kept it in his drawer after that. Meanwhile, Jonathan was rebuilding his own version of dignity. For years, he'd worn the mask of the perfect executive, decisive, driven, emotionally distant. But since that Tuesday morning in the cafeteria, the mask hadn't quite fit. At his company's quarterly shareholders meeting, he opened with an anecdote about Loretta instead of revenue projections. "You measure value in margins, but I've learned to measure it in moments. A boy's first word, a woman's kindness, a crack in a routine that lets the light pour in." Some investors pulled out. Others leaned in. He just smiled. "We're pivoting to humanity." The Loretta Foundation gained traction faster than anyone expected. Public schools from rural Alabama to downtown Chicago requested training sessions. Loretta, reluctant at first, eventually agreed to help write the curriculum only after Jonathan promised her total creative control and zero media obligations. The first module was titled, "It's Not Just Lunch, Why Warmth is Curriculum." It began with this line: "If you think food is neutral, ask a hungry child who finally felt seen over a plate of mashed potatoes." But behind the scenes, Loretta still battled doubt. "I didn't do anything," she told her sister on the phone. "I didn't teach him. I just saw him." Her sister laughed softly. "Girl, you don't need to teach sunshine how to grow flowers. You just got to open the window." Still, the backlash never fully disappeared. Conservative pundits began using her story as an example of identity politics in education. One commentator sneered, "Are we seriously rewriting academic policy because a janitor made a kid say hi?" Jonathan nearly drove to the station himself. Instead, he went on 60 Minutes. When asked if he thought race played a role in how Loretta was treated, he didn't hesitate. Of course it did. And so did class. If she had been a white speech therapist with a PhD, they'd have built a statue. But because she's a black woman who serves food, they asked her to explain herself. The interviewer blinked. "You've changed," she noted. "I hope so," he replied. "Otherwise, all of this would be theater." Caleb slowly began to open up again. One word here, two there. But it was different now, gentler, less forced. He drew pictures of chickens almost every day. Once, he handed his dad a crayon drawing of Miss Loretta wearing a crown. "She's queen?" Jonathan asked. Caleb nodded once. Sometimes Jonathan wondered what it would have been like if he'd never stopped in that cafeteria, if he'd missed the moment, if he'd stayed on his call and never noticed his son speak. The thought haunted him. One Friday afternoon, months later, Caleb did something unexpected. He asked to go back. "To school?" Jonathan asked. "To her," Caleb whispered. Loretta was living with her niece in a quiet suburb, working part-time at a community center, teaching young moms how to make affordable meals from scratch. She wore the same necklace, the same smile. When they showed up at her door, she nearly dropped a bowl of biscuit dough. "Hi," Caleb said again. And this time he added, "I missed you." Loretta dropped to one knee, tears flooding her eyes. "I missed you too, baby." Jonathan watched, hand over his mouth again, as if struck by déjà vu. "I brought you something," Caleb said, and pulled a folded sheet from his backpack. It was another drawing. This one showed Loretta, Caleb, and Jonathan standing together, a huge sun in the sky above them. 3 stick figures. One story. She put it on her fridge with a magnet that said, "Bless this mess." "Do you ever think about coming back?" Jonathan asked gently when Caleb went off to play with a toy blender. Loretta took a slow breath. "I think about them. The kids. The quiet ones. The wild ones. The ones nobody sees. Westwood still needs you," he said. "But I wouldn't ask you to go back to a place that didn't protect you." "I don't need the place," she said. "I need the chance." That night, she agreed to return not as lunch staff, but as director of student belonging and wellness. A new position, one the board fought tooth and nail. Jonathan covered the salary difference personally. "I'll pay it out of my bonus," he said. "This is more return on investment than any quarterly report." On her first day back, Loretta wore a new apron. It was bright yellow with bold blue letters across the front. "I see you." As she stepped into the cafeteria, students applauded. Some stood. Even the teachers clapped. Caleb ran to her, wrapped his arms around her waist, and whispered something into the fabric of her apron. No one heard what he said, but Loretta did. And whatever it was, it made her kneel down and hug him tighter than ever before. Across the room, Principal Reinhardt stood watching, arms crossed tightly. Slowly, he unclenched, and for the first time in years, he smiled. That afternoon, in the staff lounge, he placed Loretta's handwritten note on the bulletin board under a sign that read, "We believe in dignity." Nobody tore it down, and nobody asked her to explain herself again. Loretta's new role quickly became more than a job, it became a lighthouse. Every Monday morning, she'd stand at the cafeteria entrance greeting students by name. The rowdy ones, the shy ones, the invisible ones. It didn't matter. She saw them all. "I see you, Carter," she'd say as a boy with ADHD bounced past her. "You're growing tall." "Morning, sweet Maya." New braids. Even the seniors, usually too cool for affection, started waving from across the hallway. Her presence had that effect. It melted armor. And then came the Wednesday that tested everything. A white mother named Catherine Hawthorne, whose husband was a real estate mogul and former board president, walked into Principal Reinhardt's office with a complaint. Her daughter, Lily, had gotten into an argument with a black student over cafeteria seating. According to Lily, she felt cornered when the girl told her she wasn't entitled to her table. Catherine wanted the other students suspended. "And you've spoken to Ms. James?" Reinhardt asked. "No, I'm speaking to you," Catherine snapped. "I don't think it's appropriate for a cafeteria worker to mediate racially sensitive incidents." "She's not a cafeteria worker," Reinhardt replied, voice even. "She's our director of student belonging." "Well, maybe belonging isn't the issue. Maybe discipline is." Reinhardt paused, and for the first time in his career, he said something that could have cost him his job. Maybe if students had felt like they belonged all along, there'd be less conflict to begin with. Word spread fast. By afternoon, parents were divided. Some demanded Loretta's resignation, accusing her of injecting social politics into lunchtime. Others rallied to her defense. A few even proposed renaming the student commons after her. That night, Jonathan Keller sent out another letter. If a woman who listens is controversial, maybe it's not her causing the discomfort. Maybe it's the echo of all the things we've ignored for too long. The school board scheduled an emergency forum. It was packed. Rows of folding chairs lined the gym. Teachers, parents, students, even alumni filed in under the harsh fluorescence. The air buzzed with tension. Loretta sat in the front row. No makeup, no apology. When a microphone was passed to her, she stood slowly. "My role here isn't about race. It's about relationship. It's about remembering that kids don't act out in a vacuum. They carry what we don't see. And sometimes the most dangerous thing we do as adults is dismiss." Silence. Then a hand went up in the back. It was Lily, the girl at the center of the cafeteria conflict. "I said something mean," she admitted, eyes lowered. because I didn't want to feel outnumbered. But Miss Loretta didn't yell at me. She sat me down and asked what I was scared of. The whole room leaned in. She said, "Sometimes fear wears a mask called privilege, and it's okay to take the mask off." More silence. Then scattered claps. Then a wave. Then a standing ovation. That night, the board voted 6-1 to solidify Loretta's position as permanent and protected. They also announced a new school initiative, the human curriculum centered around empathy, equity, and emotional literacy. Loretta declined a pay raise. "I didn't come here for applause," she told Reinhardt. "I came here for Caleb." Speaking of Caleb, he was thriving. He now spoke in full sentences, quiet ones, deliberate ones, but sentences all the same. His therapy team credited a multi-context breakthrough, but he'd say it was simpler. "I just needed someone to believe I was trying." One spring morning, he stood in front of his class and gave a presentation with pictures on things that make me feel safe. Slide 1, a picture of his dog, Waffles. Slide 2, his weighted blanket. Slide 3, Miss Loretta holding a plate of biscuits. "I don't like surprises," he said into the mic, "but Miss Loretta is a good one." Parents wept. Loretta watched from the hallway, one hand over her mouth. After the presentation, Caleb ran up to her and whispered something again. Only this time, she didn't just cry. She laughed. "What did he say?" Jonathan asked later. Loretta wiped her eyes. "He asked me to be his godmother." Jonathan blinked. "Did you say yes?" "Of course I did." The next week, they celebrated Caleb's 7th birthday. It was the first party he'd ever wanted. There were only 5 guests, all chosen by him. Loretta brought cupcakes, chicken-shaped. He hugged her 3 times that day. By summer, the Loretta Foundation had over 200 partner schools. Cities were asking her to speak. Colleges requested honorary degrees. She accepted only one, from a local community college. "This is where my story started," she told the graduating class. "Washing dishes, stirring soup, seeing kids no one else saw. And now I get to teach others how to do the same." Jonathan sat in the front row, pride burning in his chest. When she stepped down from the podium, he stood first. Then everyone else followed. In the fall, Caleb started 3rd grade. He chose to return to Westwood. By then, the school looked different not on the outside, but inside. There were murals in the halls painted by students. Hands of different shades holding each other, birds flying from open cages, and in the center Loretta's face, surrounded by rays of gold. Above the cafeteria entrance, in bold painted letters, a quote from Caleb's first sentence that year. "Sometimes people bloom when you stop looking away." Jonathan walked him to class that day. He wasn't in a rush anymore. He didn't check his phone. He just watched his son walk ahead confidently, backpack bouncing. Before turning into his classroom, Caleb looked back and said, "See you after school, Dad. I'm okay." And he was. Jonathan waited at pickup later, standing beside Loretta. She wore a new apron that said, "Love served here." "I didn't know you'd be here," she said. "Where else would I be?" He glanced at Caleb, who was laughing with another boy, something that once seemed impossible. "You know," Jonathan said, "before all this, I thought leadership was about control. Now I think it's about trust." Loretta smiled. "Then I guess we both got promoted." They stood in silence for a moment, soaking in the joy that no one could manufacture, only nurture. Then Loretta added, "You think the school's ready for the next Caleb?" He nodded, "Because this time we'll see him coming." As the sun set behind the red brick walls of Westwood Academy, children spilled onto the lawn. Their laughter echoed, unburdened. The world hadn't changed overnight, but something sacred had shifted. In a small office upstairs, taped to the glass of the staff lounge, Loretta's old note still hung beside Reinhardt's printed sign. "We believe in dignity." Underneath it, someone had added a sticky note. written in a child's handwriting, and in lunch ladies who are actually superheroes. Thank you for listening. If you find it interesting, please like and subscribe to follow the next stories.